Anyway, we will jump into today because I'm trying to manage the back end as well as the front end. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along today. I'm Suzanne Phoenix. I'm the Executive Officer of VTCTA, or Victoria's Community Transport Association. I would just like to start today's session, firstly, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. Today, I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Today's session is titled Revitalising Your Volunteer Workforce, and we have two facilitators for today's session, Leigh Barker and Melitta Pinney. I hope I got that right. Yes, okay, good. Sorry, I'm just going to, can anyone see me? Because I can only see Julie Burville.
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay, thanks, Prue. Great. Now, so I'm just going to hand over to Leigh and Melitta in a moment. I just do brief introductions. Leigh Barker is the manager at Volunteer Support Services at Eastern Volunteers. She has over 20 years experience in volunteer management over diverse community sectors, including aged care, emergency relief, health and community development. And Leigh brings with her a comprehensive toolkit of experience and knowledge to help with you with revitalising your volunteer workforce. Melitta Pinney is a coordinator at Manningham Volunteer Resource Service. She's experiencing community project development and volunteer program coordination. Melitta also has a background in mental health and positive psychology, and as such offers a unique blended perspective on how to support and revitalise the individuals that make up your volunteer workforce. I'm not sure if I was on mute earlier when I said the session's being recorded, so if that's an issue for you at all, please jump off, put your camera off. Otherwise, I'm going to hand over now to Leigh and Melitta to take you through their session.
Thanks so much, Suzanne, and thanks for having us here today. Melitta, I'll get you to share your screen so we've got that up straight away. We're really taking today from a point of knowledge that you guys know what you're doing really well. You've been doing it for a long time. And what we really bring together here is what we're learning and hearing from organisations like yourself and wider, and just some experiences and some things that we've heard. The one thing we know is that the landscape is not what it once was with volunteering. It looks very different than it did look just a couple of years ago. I mean, it changes all the time, but what we've experienced this last 2 years will change it in a way we've never known. And it's a time that we have to get creative. If we want to be engaging, if we want to deliver our services, if we want a volunteer workforce that is fully engaged, then we're going to have to be more creative than we ever have before. So I guess there's just two questions we want you to think about as we present this workshop. And we just want to say too that we want to hear from you. We want to stop sharing a couple of times and get your opinions and get the brain's trust that is in this room to share what you're doing and to share that with each other if we can, because that's where I think you'll find your gems of wisdom. So just two questions to think about as we go through are these two, which have been popping up and now they don't want to share. There we go. What does your ideal volunteer program look like? How integrated is that within your whole workforce? What are the numbers you wish it would look like? What's the diversity of it? What's the skills that it brings to the table? And can you see what might be missing? Can you see where there are gaps? And just as we bring this through, just as we deliver the workshop today, just have that as your filter that you're looking through. And if there's just one or two things you can pick up, we'd be excited about that. But also for you just to really walk away with knowledge that it's worth reviewing where you're at, and it's worth looking at how we could do things differently to get to a better outcome. We wanted to start with the reality of where we're sitting. COVID has impacted everything we do. I'm just going to move our faces to the other side of the screen. That's better. Has impacted everything we do. Eastern Volunteers did a survey a little while ago, and while around 90% of organisations said that they were still delivering some services through COVID, 69% of them admitted to reducing very reduced services. So there were some delivery services that completely stopped, but most were able to do something. But of that, 45% did not activate their volunteers at all. So where they had to deliver services, they went to staff to do it rather than paid staff, rather than volunteer staff. Or they just completely changed what they do, where instead of being a hands-on service, it was a very small service, but there was still service delivery, and you guys are in that space. That's so just back to the other one. So of that 69%, they only were able to deliver services because they adapted their roles. They had to adapt to greater safety protocols. There was more space for remote and online opportunities. There was increased telephone support to clients. There was restrictions meant a different service type. But then this number is really important too. 46% say that the volunteer cohort they had pre-COVID does not match what they need now. And I think about this a little bit because I think about my volunteer programs and what was the normal turnover of volunteer staff. And you always had your volunteers that would go for the long term, but 2-year turnover would be very regular as well, if not shorter. So in a way, we would not have had the same volunteers we had before, but we may have had the same type of volunteers. Where what this is telling us is that the volunteers pre-COVID now do not match what we need to deliver services. And that was very much around age and health vulnerability, reassess the volunteer program under the COVID lens, insurance concerns, etc. So what we needed pre doesn't suit what we need now. On top of this, and thanks Melitta, on top of this, there are specific challenges within community transport that you guys are really aware of. And we're not going to sit on this too much, but your probity requirements around aged care and your peak bodies, your commitments of what people want to give and what you need, the risk aversion of general organisations having to abide by probity just means that there is such challenges in community transport. If we go to the next slide, the specific challenges of community transport, though, from COVID are really important to look at. We all know what happened when it first hit, and all volunteers over 65 and 55 were ceased. We were told not to go outside if we were in that age group. That volunteering stopped, and yet essential transport had to continue. So you were stuck where you had no volunteers to deliver your service, and you had a service that had to happen. There was a massive increase in the phone calls and the personal contact that had to happen to your client base. And how did you make that happen? That was a massive challenge. You also had the challenge that your client group were already vulnerable, and now they had that added stress of a pandemic and the insecurity associated with that. So your vulnerable client base were more needy. The massive learning curve and implementation to fulfill the COVID safe practice requirements, mind-blowing. What has to happen to get each vehicle out on the road, to get each client into a car is phenomenal, and you guys have adapted and changed, but it's been a huge impact on the volunteer team. One of the things that we're hearing is that the hard conversations are happening more and more with volunteer management, with having to have harder conversations constantly with your volunteer team. There's a tiredness of having to keep that car COVID clean. There's a tiredness of having to wear masks. There's a tiredness of having to clean everything inside and out before we get on the road. And on top of that now is this vaccine mandate. And I know you guys are all over it, but it's another level of heaviness on your volunteer staff. And that change of the primary needs of your client base, where you might have taken them shopping or they couldn't get out. So could you deliver a service of taking shopping to them? Everything had to be looked at. And as though this is really heavy, what it actually does do is bring us to the conversation of, has COVID allowed you to change the way that you think about your volunteer program? And it's actually a question I would like to share to the group. How has COVID allowed you to change what you've been doing that you really had your hands tied before? I'd love to know if anyone would be willing to share something around that. Just will need to take yourself off mute and comment. I'll just give you a moment.
I know, Leigh, at Eastern Volunteers with the transport group, one of the things that our transport manager was able to do. And a lot of it's around community engagement, which we'll talk about later, but trying to find other meaningful things to engage volunteers with. So the same volunteers were then able to be redirected to do welfare calls, because there were so many welfare calls that needed to be done for participants. And I know that the feedback around that was that people actually enjoyed that because they still got the engagement with the clients, albeit not the practical driving role.
Yeah, so a change in the role that the volunteer was doing. Does anyone else have an example of how you changed the way you look at the volunteer program through this time?
I know there are many and varied, Leigh, but I know
That's okay.
sometimes people are not keen to chat on here, but many and varied, absolutely.
That's okay, cool. Well, if you'd like to change, put some things in. So Prue, sorry, thanks, Prue.
We actually basically had to start a social support team for our volunteers because they were severely impacted and their mental health was severely impacted because they couldn't volunteer. The volunteers that wanted to volunteer were precluded because of their age, and the ones that could volunteer didn't want to because of the pandemic. So we had a catch-22. The people that used to get out and about quite often were told they weren't allowed to. So that impacted them a lot. So we had to start weekly call groups with our volunteers just to get them all in a room, because half of their enjoyment of their day was not only the clients, but the camaraderie in the tea room. Because we'd have 25 volunteers all turn up between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning to start their shifts. And due to technology problems with our volunteers, they couldn't be off-site doing welfare calls because you needed to capture the data into a system. So that was challenging as well. So our staff was doing all the welfare calls, and our volunteers, if they wanted to, especially when they didn't want to transport clients, they were doing click and collect for us, picking up groceries, taking to a central location, and then we would deliver essential groceries.
Thanks, Prue. Yeah. Thank you. So you actually did focus on supporting your volunteers through a social support sort of menu. That's really fantastic. Yep. You touched on something there that is a real limitation, in that your staff had to pick up the welfare calls because of the data entry was needed to be done in-house. And so it was these sort of what am I saying, restrictions that really have had to be looked at within our programs to where can we change some of that. And because of a lot of the peak body requirements, you can't change a lot of it. And sometimes you can change it at an organisation level, but you know where you can push those boundaries. But that's fantastic. Thank you. Did anyone else want to make a comment, or will we move on? Let's move on. So that was the look at, we wanted to sort of look at naming where we really were at, what we were facing, and then moving forward. And so Melitta's going to go to a bit more positive place now. Melitta, so if you want to move on through that, would be great.
So, I mean, one of the great things, or the things that we can reflect on now, is what we've learned from this experience and how we can embrace some of these learnings, like the ones just mentioned, to really revitalise our volunteer workforce. And when we talk about revitalise, what we mean is, let's look at what we've learned, look at where we are, and what works better in our new environment, with the understanding that it's only going to move forward, and we need to adapt and optimize. And I know you guys have been doing an amazing job for the last 2 years. If there's one sector in volunteering that's had the most challenge, it certainly is community transport. But some of the findings that we've had through different surveys and some personal experience in managing volunteers is that, being able to make change is really important, being able to be a little less attached to the way we used to do things. And I know people have had to do that in all aspects of their life. And so understandably, for our volunteer management programs and the way we do things, it's the same. So the way that we, can design and collaborate programs to work for the current situation. Also importantly is understanding your organisation's risk appetite. And I do appreciate that you have a lot of, peak bodies that influence that. And it's interesting to also look at, where is the line between what the peak bodies and the probity requires, and are there any parts that we have ourselves in our organisation also placed that may be restricting us a little bit in the way that we can innovate. And of course, there's a lot of, as you guys would know better than anyone else, a lot of trial training and communicating along the way. Importantly with the volunteers is around taking them on the journey. So, that's about being upfront about what's happening. We're trialing this, we're going, we've got this plan in place. Let's see how it goes, but we don't have to know everything or be perfect at everything straight away. And I'm sure by now you guys have absolutely refined it, or I think volunteers are quite accommodating in understanding that this is a really unusual situation. Another thing that we've learned, which is really fabulous, particularly if you've got the mechanisms to capture it, is that people love to help in a crisis. I know through Eastern Volunteers and Manningham Volunteer Resource Service, we had a lot of people just coming out of the woodwork who wanted to volunteer. And that's kind of understandable because in other aspects of their life, they may not have any a lot of control over what they can do, or they may not feel that they can actually contribute or make change, but volunteering something they can do. And so obviously for us as volunteer involving organisations, it's about being able to capture that, but also only utilising it as much as it assists our program. We've got a centralised volunteer bank where we can send out different roles, but it means that we still have to strategically know what we need and only accept volunteers that actually meet that need. As harsh as it may sound, that's what creates a really healthy volunteer program. More than ever, partnerships have been really important, and through different networking platforms, we're seeing more and more sharing of resources and being more open to, changing the way we think about our volunteers. So, a lovely example of that was a program that had no ability to utilize their volunteers, and that they had driving skills and all these sort of things similar to yourselves. And then through one of our networking events, another group said, well, hey, actually, we need vehicles and a little bit of help to do our emergency food relief response. So, the two organisations were able to work together with the main aim being, let's deliver the programs that we can, but also keep our volunteers engaged, but they're in another program. And that's okay. It's okay to sort of share our resources in that way. And I think that's been a really big and understandable challenge for a lot of organisations to be able to think at that sort of community collaborative level. Obviously, remote volunteering where possible. Sorry, I've got a typo in there. That's not going to be, we understand that's not going to be possible for a lot of transport requirements. However, is it possible to think about, are there some administrative things that you do that you're able to share with volunteers? And we'll go into this in a lot more detail shortly around other ways to keep volunteers engaged. But really the most important thing, which I know that community transport have had to learn as well, is that diversity is the key. And throughout this presentation, we're going to look at different ways that you can diversify your volunteer workforce so that you've got a stronger base, and we can do that by age, by skill set, by a whole range of different avenues. And the more diverse we are, the better that we represent the community that we serve, but also it means that if, in this example, a certain age group aren't able to be involved, then we can still draw on the rest of the volunteer cohort at the same time. So this is an opportunity, and we won't go into it in detail now. These slides will be sent out to you, so you don't need to scurry to write them down. But, you know, it's really important. You know, we originally asked you, what would your ideal volunteer program look like and what's missing? So let's take a step back and have a look a little bit deeper. It's these kind of questions that can help us to really revitalize our program when we look at, okay, do we have enough volunteers for each of our service needs? For some organisations, they actually have surplus volunteers. I know that might be hard for some people to believe, and there are ways through networking to connect with them. Obviously, you'd have a really good idea of how many people are engaged or not. And I think it's also important to remember that for some people, they just want to be engaged when they're volunteering. And so it doesn't mean that they're not going to come back when the time is available. It just means that they're not interested in Zoom activities or other things, but they will come back when they can. And I know there's a lot of people who are really keen to do so. And some of the messaging around that can be, well, you know, the way that you're volunteering at the moment is by, you know, being ready for when we can. It feels counterintuitive to be doing nothing. However, at that point in time, that might be what the volunteering is. But also, as Leigh alluded to, are there any current tasks that haven't historically been offered to volunteers that maybe could be? You know, it could be things like newsletters, communication needs. I'm sure you've all explored them and would be able to share with us the range of ways that you've done that. And also looking at, well, what's the real strength of your volunteer program? And how can you capitalize on that? We will have further discussions later, but yeah, these are just things that in your own time, you might like to sit down with your management team or your board and just sort of look at how we're going to move forward. So this, you know, famous quote is all about, if you're not getting the outcomes you seek, and we're understanding that in this environment that is challenging, but let's try different strategies and learn from each other to do so. If your recruitment strategies at the moment haven't got you the results, well, it can be tweaked and changed. And sometimes it might be about the length of time that we're asking for volunteers, or maybe we're not speaking to the cohorts that we need to. We're not on the platforms or using the communication methods that they actually need. So some things for actual engagement, if volunteers can't be involved in their normal role, again, other ways that they can be involved behind the scenes. Now, I know all different organisations will have different rules and probity around fundraising, but, you know, I've just popped up a couple of ideas that some organisations have done. Do people have a flair for something that you can capitalise on to get them involved if they want to be? So, you know, yeah, some people, you know, they have a passion for trivia, so they start running a trivia program. You know, what purpose can you offer current volunteers? So there's a whole range of different things there. You know, are there any new learnings? Do you have trainings, or can you share trainings with them that are available that might help them to better understand the sector, or perhaps their role or the organisation? Maybe a volunteer would want to actually run that. And I understand that this is going to vary hugely depending on the size of your staff. So you might only have a few people, or you might have a whole range, and that's going to vary quite a bit as well. We know you've been doing brilliantly with this over the 2 years, so we're not trying to tell you how to suck eggs. It's really just other ideas. And even if throughout this workshop you just pick up one new idea or strategy, then that'll be a really great success. So one of the things we've done, we had people who were assessing volunteers who were interested in going into various positions that we have on our database. And, you know, there just suddenly wasn't as much of a requirement for that. So we were able, with some of the volunteers who were interested, to do a little bit of upskilling and training, and we had to adapt a lot to learning about training people online into other different roles. So here's just a broad brush of different ideas. Some may be relevant to your organisation, some may not, but as I mentioned, you will get the slides for all of these. And importantly is really to ask them, as I mentioned before, and as we all know with, like National Volunteer Week, some people want to be involved in activities and others are like, I just want to turn up to volunteer and that's it. And then I want to go. So, it's fine to ask your volunteers, what do they need? What do they want? And just to, I guess, have faith that if they don't want to be engaged, that they still will show up afterwards when they're able to. How can we support the well-being of volunteers? So I know you've all been offering different programs. There are a plethora of resources out there as well, particularly in the area of mental health, and some organisations that have employee assistance programs where there's free over-the-phone counselling. Sometimes they're able to offer that to their volunteers as well. Otherwise, there are a lot of online resources that you can tap into. And as we mentioned before, naming the reality. It's okay to reveal to volunteers, you know what, this is really hard. We're currently working on how we can do da-da-da, and we really appreciate your patience in the meantime. And then I think this is for all of us because we've done such an amazing job. I mean, it's really important to celebrate your wins, even though it's not the same as it was before. All the little wins, all the little things like, learning to recruit online or being able to create a moment of engagement during the week for a volunteer. It's really important still to focus on what you have done and all the little steps, all the little adaptations. And also, I think as a matter of well-being for volunteer managers and yourselves is to remember it isn't normal times and we can't fix it. We can't actually make it the way it was. We aren't necessarily able to fill all the roles as well as we did before. So I think a little bit of also leeway, if I can kindly recommend that for yourselves, to really still celebrate all the wins along the way and understand you're not going to be able to make it perfect for your volunteers. And that's okay as long as we can continue. Basically, all you can do is do the best you can with what you've got at any point in time, and we keep sort of changing as that changes as well.
Thanks, Melitta. I think it's really important to know that the revitalising your volunteer cohort is about engaging and having energy into the volunteers that you have on board already that are there, those that are engaged and those that are in the background and not as engaged or active at the moment. And how do we do that continually? And I'm hopeful with the restrictions lifting tomorrow night that we'll be able to get out and about a bit more and we're heading to a good place, and that will be really helpful. The other side of is revitalising is how do you bring in new to lift and freshen and widen your volunteer cohort. And we touched on before in the surveys that we did that everyone sort of realised that diversity was the only way forward. Easy to say, really hard to do. And what does diversity mean in volunteering? What does it mean when we're looking at changing who our volunteer cohort are, and how do we do that well? I think being really specific and targeting is really important. Looking at your volunteers at the moment and say, where are our volunteers currently coming from? Are we happy that we've got a good range? And if we're not, who isn't seen in our volunteer cohort? Do we have young people? Do we have older people? Do we have people with skills, people that are unskilled? Do we have one demographic of society, or do we have wide demographics of society? And actually be really honest about what your current volunteer cohort looks like, and then to be willing to target and diversify. And when we say that, we're talking about age, we're talking about skill, we're talking about needs, what your needs are, cultural, flexible, remote, in-person, a whole lot of range of diversity. The next slide, Melitta, sorry. So I think, did I jump ahead? I think I missed something there, Melitta. I'm really sorry. That's all right. We can go through, sorry. So when we talk about the diversity, we are talking about, sorry, Melitta, the next one, that these people are found within the disability sector, within students, within newly arrived, professional, short-term, long-term, remote youth. These are sort of the kind of volunteers at the moment that are out there. Now, we sometimes look at these things and we automatically have blockers that say, we're a service that's providing a service. We can't have someone with a disability helping us provide that service. We're going to break into this a little bit further on with some details around it. Or, you know, we can't have students because we can't have young people without full licenses. And yet there's a way to really focus on having really good students that will add real depth to our program. The same with the other areas. And project and short term is something that really worries us, particularly in transport, in that it takes so long for us to invest in someone. How can we only have them here for a short term? But I would challenge that thinking, because sometimes you might have someone that might be with you for 3 months, but they might be with you full time for 3 months, as opposed to 1 day a week for 9 months. So it could be worthwhile. So it's about being willing to shape some of those projects and some of those thinking around our recruitment. Melitta, I've lost the screen of our ones. I'll let you talk through this one.
Thanks, Leigh. So, yeah, we just wanted to have a little bit of a snapshot of, you know, who wants to volunteer in the community. And as you can see from this, it is people all across the lifespan. And, you know, there are quite a lot of youth, and people volunteer for different reasons, and they come from different cohorts and different groups. So we're going to break this down a little bit, but I just wanted to show you this, that, you know, maybe in our minds, or because we've had more contact traditionally with maybe people who are sort of over 55, we feel that, well, they're the only ones who want to volunteer. But actually, as you can see from here, people of all different age groups want to. And that sort of comes back to what Leigh was talking about around where are the volunteers hiding? And it's about us learning a little bit to adapt what we do so that we can be inviting for them, and so that they feel like they can be a part of what we offer. And we're going to delve into that a lot further now. So if we look at diversity by age group, which I know is a really hot topic for community transport, because you guys have been the ones really hardest hit by that. So ways that you can engage younger people. For example, how are you targeting potential volunteers who are currently studying? Now, I know that one of the blockers that comes up sometimes is, oh, we can't offer placements, that's too much work. We're not actually referring to placements. There are a lot of young people and people studying who actually just want some real life experience. And that might be as a part of their course. So, you know, could you approach educators, like look up places that deliver courses such as community services or social work or aged care, those that are relevant to the services that you offer, and just mention, hey, you know, we're looking for volunteers. It's not a placement. However, would you be willing to share that with your student groups? And, you know, you could even offer specific roles around that. Or you could have, you know, sort of group volunteering situations where maybe you get, you know, 2 volunteers doing something, and you have a rolling volunteer program so that it's actually ongoing, and each young person or student then teaches the next person how to do the role. So it's just thinking a little bit differently about it, because, I mean, I know from my experience during the last 2 years, the students and young people we have had have been absolutely brilliant. Some of the things that they have really been able to offer us, which has been amazing, something you might appreciate is the ideas, and they're so tech savvy, being able, I might have something that I need to promote and they're like, oh yeah, sure, you could do it this way, you could do it that way. And the other thing, if you think about it, young people would also, you could have some young people, students who work as volunteers, and their role could be to promote and to get more young people and student volunteers in, because they're going to know the platforms and the communication methods and what would be of interest. So it's really thinking about that. And, we might have traditional shifts that we've had for other age groups of our volunteer cohort, but is it possible that we could change it sometimes? I know that's quite challenging with the driving roles, but other parts, can we work shifts around so that students actually would be able to be involved? And that can be as, it could be having one-on-one conversations. And another thing that I'm sure a lot of you are aware of is setting yourself up as a registered mutual obligation provider through Centrelink. So this would work with a different age group cohort. And I know that over a certain age, for people who receive benefits, they have the option to do 15 hours of volunteering per week instead of looking for work. And again, if we set that up in the right way, where we're quite selective and also name the expectations at the beginning. So you might have to be a bit firm to say, okay, if there's any week or day where you're not showing up, I will need to notify Centrelink. Once those expectations are set, we've had some amazing, and we continue to have some amazing volunteers. That's 15 hours a week, potentially ongoing. And it's very easy to sign up for that. What about looking at age groups as it relates to people who'll be wanting to get back into the workforce? So parents wanting to return, needing to build their confidence, wanting to get back out into the community. Could you be involved or find out where are the parents groups in your community? And is that a way, could it be through neighbourhood houses? That could be an in, and it means that the way you write your roles or your needs is really speaking to those people, talking about, we'd love to have you engage with us to start to build your confidence. So you can see how when we start to identify different groups within different age groups, we're more specific in the way we target them. It's a little bit like marketing and promotion in that way. Also, another group you might want to tap into is newly arrived migrants, being able to offer roles for where people could improve their English language skills whilst doing different jobs. So people who are new here, who haven't connected with the community, are really wanting to through volunteering. And are there opportunities that we have in our programs that we could adapt or change to enable that? You might find that you get volunteers who want to do that for years to come. So with young people also, it's really important to partner with them to look at volunteering also from the perspective of what we need for the services we need to deliver, and also looking at it from the perspective of the volunteer, because most people, they do want to get something out of it, whether it's giving back to the community, whether it's developing confidence, whether it's social engagement and connection, maybe it's to get confidence to move into employment pathways. So, you can see there's a lot of different options. And even if one of these just strikes a little idea in your mind, it could be really worth following up on. When we look at people with disability in Victoria, we can see that of those who want to volunteer, we've got, 20% of people want to, or 20% of volunteers have a disability in Victoria. So that's a huge portion of the population that if we have blockers to that in our organisation, that we're actually missing out on. And we just wanted to also pop this up just to give us a bit of awareness. So, 60% of the Victorian workforce are people who identify as having a disability. And within the ranges of disability, often we tend to have an idea of what does disability mean. And as you can see with this, 66% of people who identify as disability have some mental health issues, which means that they can be perfectly capable of doing so many different roles. Often when we think of disability, we think of physical disability. So this slide's really just to show us that there's a wide range. There are a lot of people who we may not be targeting. And these are people who may stay with us for a very long time, particularly if they feel that they don't fit in or they don't, have the normal access to volunteering programs. They're going to really appreciate it if you can adapt to allow them to be involved. We can also look at diversity by skill base. So traditionally, we've often thought of volunteers as people who are no longer working and just want to do something really simple and easy. But there are a whole range of people, even those who work full time, with really high levels of skill who want to volunteer. So importantly, when we're writing up job or volunteer positions, we want to be quite specific in the skills we need, because that way we're going to target those individuals. I mean, we've been really lucky. I know Leigh has had some amazing examples of really highly skilled people who have been able to offer amazing contributions to the organisation. So a lot of people want to be involved in projects, or they want to have a little bit of responsibility to really run with things. So if you do have, these wish list ideas of things you'd love to have actualized, this is where that can come in really handy. And again, we need to be flexible about when and how they volunteer. And if you're able to stretch some of your organisation's policies and procedures to enable remote volunteering as well, or a combination of two, your volunteer base just expands exponentially, because they don't have to be local. But I do appreciate that for transport, a lot of the roles that you need are very place-based. Just an example that we had was we were asked by council to run a community support line. It was about a year ago now, last Christmas. And for us, this was really new. It was the first time that we recruited professionals. So they needed to be people who are counsellors or psychologists or social workers online, that we needed to develop quite a clear and firm governance process and communicate that clearly with all the required probity for those volunteers. But they did it 100% remotely. Like, some of these people I've never actually met, and it went really well. And we timetabled for several weeks. And so we had like a volunteer highly skilled base of counsellors supporting people in the community. Another way that we had to think about things differently was, once that project finished, some people were like, oh, that was great. See you later. That was fantastic. And we really appreciated that they offered their time. Others were a little bit curious about, well, what else could I do? And we were able to build enough rapport with them to identify the things that they loved. And I mean, several of those volunteers have actually gone on to do other roles with us. One was an amazing young woman who is absolutely fantastic at evaluation and has had a career in that area. And she has since been able to help us with different grant applications. I think we had a gap between lockdowns, so we were actually able to meet. But all of that happened remotely, and she loved it because it gave her a sense of purpose and contribution while she was looking for work. another young man, he moved on to become a volunteer assessor with us. So still using those people skills, and has since worked in different paid roles for us. So I guess that's a little bit about, you know, how can we repurpose, refresh, and just look at things outside the box? Because I think a lot of the time, you know, we become a bit too familiar with our way of doing things. And I think if anything, what COVID has really taught us is that diversity is the key, and that we need to think of things outside the box. And that's why we're sort of presenting these to you today. So Leigh, I'll hand over to you for the enablers to success.
I think it's just really important to remember, thank you, Melitta, that when you're talking about revitalising, there's not a certain singular way to do it. And everything that we do, every way that we are attempting to engage with our current volunteers, attempting to bring in new people and diversifying our team, we're making steps forward. Every time we take a chance to think a little differently and push ourselves a little further, we're making a step forward. We know that having a diverse workforce, whether it be paid or unpaid, is a way that we can continue to deliver services moving forward. We've lived that this last 2 years, and we know it to be true. The more we can integrate our volunteers and our paid workforce together will really enable us to have great success as well. Volunteers, we know, need to know that they're making a difference. And I think that's what's been really hard, and Prue mentioned it earlier, where once the volunteers stopped doing what they were wanting to do, how the effect that is having on their mental health. Sometimes in volunteering, we've made a really big error to dumb down our volunteer roles and not give the things that are really important to our volunteers, unless there was a need to, like, driving is something that is highly skilled and you need a good skill set, but we're very rare. Sometimes we don't want to give other important roles. We're not sure that we can do that. And so we really encourage to think about the skills that you need and to really put out there for real purposeful roles apart from just your driving, because volunteers want to do that and they are lining up to do that. Development pathways and position descriptions need to be seen as professional as you do for your paid employees. The rights for volunteers say that they've got to have a position description, and it's important that we do things correctly that way. But it's also important in our planning that when we're planning that we have roles, well, let's put the position description around it. Let's be really clear about what it is we want, what are the outcomes, and then we can be really sure, is that actually what we want? Is that the way we want this to look? And who are the right people for these roles? Expect your volunteer cohort to turn over. I know when we invest a lot into someone, it's really hard when they leave us quickly, but it's the way of the future. We're hearing that volunteers do not want to be tied to one role ongoing. It's not the way people want to volunteer. They want to be involved in multiple different organisations. They have multiple interests. They want to share their time amongst their interests, not just in their same way. So expect turnover. And if you can, in your training and in the way that you're doing it, think about ways that you can understand that this longevity of a volunteer may change, and so that you're open to that. Being inclusive of all demographics is really important. It's important because it'll show you the community, that you reflect the community in which you work, and that will draw you more volunteers as well. And that's really important. And being creative in your thinking is incredibly important. Hard to do. We're so stuck in doing what we normally do that it's hard to lift our heads to think of something new and something different. Bringing people into your planning is really helpful with that. So, if you have some issues in the way you're doing things, widen who you speak to that about, and you'll get some different ideas from some of the most amazing places. And understand that COVID, as challenging and as horrendous it has been, has given us that restart button, that we can be creative in the way that we move forward. Thanks, Melitta. And so the question really is, you know, what will we do differently than what we've done before? How will we be willing to share the learnings of what we've done? How do we reflect how people want to volunteer? We somehow missed a couple of slides in there that talked about from Volunteering Victoria around the way that we know volunteers want to volunteer and they don't want to volunteer the way they had in the past. We do still have that segment of society that will want to have their role for 1 or 2 days a week moving forward. They are in that older sort of cohort of 65 plus, but they're actually not as great as they once were. People are saying they want to volunteer, but they want to volunteer short term. They want to volunteer remotely. They want to volunteer in real purposeful ways. And they want to volunteer for a cause that they believe in. So how do we make our programs reflect what people, how they want to volunteer, and how will we do that differently? And I can't answer that for you, but I just want to encourage you to be really creative in how you're thinking and to bring people into your think tank, to look at your volunteer program and say, these are our strengths, but traditionally, I can never fill this role. I always have the same role that I might be advertising year in, year out. I can never get enough people into it. There's something wrong there. There's something that you need to nudge into to say, why can't I fill these roles? Why am I always looking for these roles? Is it that the demand is so big that it's right that I'm looking for these roles? Or is there something within the way my program's running? Is there something within what I'm advertising doesn't reflect what the role really is? Is there something we can change differently in the role? Or is it the advertising? Is it in the engagement? But why am I always looking for these same roles? So there's something there that needs thinking about. How can I push my organisation to allow me to do some things off-site if we haven't been able to do that before? How can we train people differently? How can we have better trust within the areas if that's what it is into? Volunteer support services can help you with this across the region. So we can help with recruitment and role design. There's lots of training and lots of the different organisations offer training. So we'd encourage you to keep connecting. I know ourselves, and I think I saw Anne there as well, would be really happy to support in some way in that as well. But be willing to be thinking about what you're doing, be willing to try something different, and just be encouraged that you guys have done the most amazing job to keep service happening for a lockdown for nearly 2 years now. And I just want to give you a hands up and thumbs up because I think you've done a brilliant job. And if we can be supportive at all in helping you think creatively and helping you revitalise in any way, please just let us know. We'd love to be supporting you. And there's our contact details. These are just some links to some resources for some activities and ideas for engaging your current volunteers as well. And Melitta will send those out as well. So Suzanne, that's it from us.
Thank you so much, Leigh and Melitta. It was really comprehensive, and I hope it was thought-provoking and gave people opportunity to think about what things look like next year and how things can be done differently. I don't know if anyone, if there's any questions that people would like to ask of you, or if there's any comments or issues that you see, if you vehemently disagree with Leigh and Melitta, or you agree or disagree, or would like to say anything, I'd really encourage anyone to just take themselves off mute now and put forward. But I understand, I think probably right now, and especially today, one day before lockdown restrictions change again, people are probably a bit tired, and maybe just being here is a huge commitment as it is. I really appreciate that. I'll just give a moment if anyone would like to chip in at all.
Hi Suzanne, it's Rita.
Oh, hi Rita.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Thanks Leigh and Melitta, that was really good, very informative, thank you. I just wanted to say from Bridget's point of view, finding volunteers is a task, And
Sorry, Rita, we lost you there for a moment. Can you just say that again?
Finding volunteer drivers is a really hard task, and we've got people working on it, but places like the CFA, we're just going to start tapping into. Ventura Buses is around the corner from us. We've advertised with them in their newsletters, trying to recruit volunteer drivers. You know, they might have downtimes between shifts. And just going out to organisations. Julie's here today. She's tapped into motor groups that are driving, and sent out sort of an email out to them to see if there's any drivers out there that might want to sort of come down and drive with us. So I suppose it's looking at all the transport organisations out there and seeing if you can tap into them.
I think, Rita, you're exactly right. It's a role where there's a high demand for drivers. And I think we've very much tried to target them from the same pool before. So actually connecting with driving organisations and you know, Ventura Buses, that's a brilliant idea. And I know that we've had a fair bit of success as well. Melitta mentioned connecting with some universities, and I would really suggest that, advertising directly on the different notice boards of the organisations. I think very much students who are studying paramedicine and you know, different things like that really like the idea of opportunity to be having like skills that they're learning. And so we've had some success in that manner as well.
That's great. And we also are involved with Boys Brigade. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. It's the original Scouts. And one of their philosophies was they used to offer their boys a can of Coke if they could bring a friend along to a group. And they doubled their group just by that particular activity. And we've thought about it a couple of times. What can we offer our volunteer drivers to just bring along a friend? And we have a couple of volunteers who've recruited other volunteers just by talking to them. So there's always that avenue as well, tapping into your own group of people to get more people.
That is the best way. Word of mouth is the very best way. And it's one of the things I normally say is, does your backyard know you exist? Do your volunteers, do their friends, do their neighbours know how they spend their day? And if they're loving what they do, they will spread that, and that is where you'll get your best people from, is that word of mouth. The incentive, I mean, Coke is very addictive, so you know, bribery is great. That's right.
Thanks so much, Rita. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at all? No, I will just continue then. Leigh and Leigh, I'm only going to speak for a few minutes. If you're happy to stay on, that'd be really valuable if you've got the few more minutes. The other part of this session is to prepare us for VTCTA. Will going to run a statewide, that's for Tasmania and for Victoria, volunteer recruitment campaign, and we will be launching that in February next year, which is deemed the time that most people will be getting their services will be back, hopefully. It's traditionally the time of the year anyway where services are getting back up to full speed. We will do that through we'll have an online portal through our website, and we want to be able to connect up people who are looking for volunteer roles with organisations who have volunteer vacancies. They'll only be for VTCTA members. And so you'll hear more about that, and we would, certainly wanting to have make sure or get commitment from the organisations who have volunteer roles they need filled and that will engage with that process. We certainly don't want people who are keen in a role that connection to just go off into the ether. So there'll be lots more discussion with you about how to do that, and understanding too if it is mostly volunteer driver roles you're looking for, or you're looking for other roles as well, other volunteer roles to be filled. I think, sorry, I'm going to sneeze again. So luckily that didn't happen. Yes, I'm really keen to hear if anyone's got any comments about that, anything they would like to see occur in that process, or like to be involved in supporting that that program or project or endeavour. We will do looking to engage media as much as possible and putting case studies out there, more stories we can of individuals, how it impacts individuals to utilise the service, and also from volunteer driver perspective and organisational perspective. I mean, I think that's pretty exciting. I think it's a great way that the peak can support the sector. And yeah, really keen to hear anyone's views on that. I don't know if anyone wants to speak now or ask any questions. Seems very quiet. So, so often I feel like I'm sitting here talking to myself. But if no one's got any more questions or want any more discussion, that's really what we wanted to cover off today. I really thank Melitta and Leigh for their time, and we will send out the information provided in today's session as well. And I think that is all for us. So I will say farewell. I hope you have a good day, and I hope the transition for those in Victoria, which I think is most of us today, that it's not too trying a time. Thank you very much, everyone. See you. Bye.